All right, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. We are honored to have Linda Diamond here with us tonight, and she and I think we've known each other for a little bit, but this is our first time really working together. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to work with Linda. I'm going to read her bio, and then we're going to get started. So Linda Diamond is best known for her nationally recognized professional books, Teaching Reading Source Book, used by many teacher preparation programs, Assessing Reading, Multiple Measures, and the Vocabulary Handbook. Linda was a teacher, principal, director of curriculum and instruction, and a senior policy analyst in an education think tank. In 1995, Linda Diamond founded and became president of the Consortium of Reading Excellence in Education, which is now called Core Learning, an organization committed to improving literacy and math outcomes for all children. After serving as CORE's president for 26 years, Linda stepped down from that role and continues to serve on CORE's advisory board and the Reading League California Advisory Board, and advises publishers, state agencies, legislators, and other organizations as they work to improve literacy instruction. So Linda is one of these folks that just doesn't quit like the Energizer Bunny, and we're so glad you don't. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Okay. I hope everyone can see my slides, but we're going to get going. This happens to be a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I am an old timer, and I was trained by Dr. Siegfried Engelmann back in the day in direct instruction. And I was principal of a school that used reading mastery. And I also was a high school teacher who used corrective reading. It was called DISTAR back in the day, with high school students who were reading at about third grade level. So I go way back to mastery learning and small group instruction. And I want to talk about these two overlooked practices, which for some reason, those of us in the science of reading community are not really paying attention to. And the question I would have is, why not? What's happened? Why aren't we paying attention to these two practices? And I would argue that in part, it's the textbook publishers who have designed word recognition instruction, which is what I'm going to focus on, to be whole class instruction rather than small group instruction from the start. And the reason I'm talking about this is the research has been very clear for a long amount of time that small group instruction for word recognition skills in particular is actually the best way to teach those skills. So I'd like you all to take a moment to just read this quote, which was from the National Institute for Direct Instruction. And think about any parts of it that you think make sense to you, why they make sense. What are those words that stand out for you? And if you want, you can put some of those words in the chat. Donna, could you moderate the chat for me?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So words that stand out for me is that we can accelerate students or reteach at the rate at which they learn. And what that means is those who need more practice can get it immediately, not just later in tier 2 in an MTSS framework, but right away in tier 1. And if we have children who already came to school reading, and they're there are those kids, I call them the cereal box kids. They were reading before they started school. They don't have to start at exactly the same place in word recognition. So let's proceed. What's the research on the efficacy and effectiveness of small group instruction and mastery learning right from the start? Well, we have a body of research that tells us that whole class lessons can be too difficult for some students, those with the least literacy knowledge, and then too easy for students with the most literacy knowledge. And that's going to include recognizing that many of our multilingual and emergent bilingual students already come with some knowledge in their own language, particularly if it's an alphabetic language, that can be more easily transferred and may not need to start at exactly the same point. Matt Burns talks about this a lot, that we need to differentiate by skill, not by text level. And that's what we can do at the very start. We also understand that teaching constrained skills, and I'm going to explain what that is, explicitly and systematically, and then matching that instruction to a student's developmental needs can ensure that the largest portion of the literacy block is allocated to those unconstrained abilities throughout the elementary years. And now I'm going to explain what those are. And I'm going to use Hollis Scarborough's reading rope to explain that. So we refer to word recognition skills as constrained skills. And the reason we refer to them as such is because they can be taught, if done well, within a confined period of time. They don't go on forever. So they can be mastered. And that's why Hollis has increasingly automatic. But language comprehension skills, on the other hand, are never completed. They are always ongoing. They're unconstrained by time because language gets more complex, syntax becomes more complex, vocabulary becomes more complex, and the content and knowledge becomes more complex. And that's why Hollis identifies it as increasingly strategic. So I'm zeroing in on the word recognition skills for this small group instruction from the start. What other research do we have that supports this idea? Well, we have ample research studies about the importance of feedback, and feedback is best done in small group settings because we can target that feedback exactly to what the students are doing. We can't do that as easily in a whole class setting. We simply can't see or hear all of the students. We also know, and this is from Hoover and Tumner in their latest book on the cognitive foundations of reading and reading difficulty, that teaching beginning reading in a whole class format conflicts with the basic principles of differentiated instruction. And that's because it's neither efficient nor effective for many students, depending on their specific skill knowledge. Sharon Vaughn referred to a meta-study that found small groups provided the highest effect sizes, especially for struggling readers. But Liu and his colleagues found this to be true even for students without disabilities and students who were not struggling. And Dr. Vaughn is writing a new paper that will be in the National Reading League Journal, and she's going to address this topic as well. We also know that whole class instruction simply does not give students sufficient engaged reading opportunity, nor can we have enough time on task for these students. We know that opportunity to learn, opportunities to respond, and then get feedback are absolutely critical to mastering these word recognition skills in particular. And I'm going to take you for a moment to this infographic, the newest one from the International Dyslexia Association. And I want to call your attention to the how side. When we talk about the principles that are necessary to teach the content that research has told us needs to be taught, we know that it needs to be direct and systematic, but it also needs to be mastery oriented. And to be mastery oriented, we have to target and provide prompt feedback. We have to have many interactions. We also have to scaffold, and it must be data-driven. This is all best accomplished in a small group. So why mastery learning? And then I'll go more into why small group. So mastery learning, the idea behind mastery learning, it's an old idea. Benjamin Bloom first talked about this, and I believe Donna sent you some articles when you registered and some links. And I wrote an article about this, and all of the citations are within that article. Unfortunately, some of them are behind a paywall. We know that mastery learning enables successful learning of new material by providing small amounts in each lesson. We also know that the previously taught skills that were mastered become the foundation and support for the new skills, and that's critical. The prior mastered learning enables students not to be overwhelmed when they're learning new content because they've already been successful. And it ensures that students can take advantage of that past learning, and that way we can accelerate their new learning. So take a look at this quote, again from the National Institute for Direct Instruction. And I'd like you to think about and put in the chat some of the words that stand out for you. And then Donna, if you can tell me some of those words as they put them in the chat, it would be super.
Sure. No one yet. Master, strong foundation, foundations, strong foundations, successful,
Right.
confident.
Yes, and I would argue also for self-esteem, because once students are successful and confident, their self-esteem increases. And this is the benefit of a mastery approach rather than a spiral curriculum approach. And that's the distinction that I'm making here. There are some very good curricula that use a spiral approach where they come back to skills over time, but mastery takes longer. In a mastery learning approach, and there are curricula today that are designed this way, and I will be naming some later, students are more likely to master a word recognition skill even in one lesson. And then in those lessons, increasingly we interleave prior skills with the new skills. So they're always coming back, but we can see mastery very quickly in a small group approach. So what's necessary for a mastery learning approach? Well, the very first thing is we have to have accurate placement. And this is true for grouping. We need some sort of pre-assessment. And I'm going to talk some more about that. There are curricula that have built-in placement measures, particularly these programs that we might refer to as capital DI, big DI, direct instruction, like those created by Siegfried Engelmann and his colleagues. And then there's what we refer to as little DI. SIPS is an example of little DI. Bookworms is an example of little DI. Success for All is an example of little DI. And many of Anita Archer's Phonics for Reading and Marilyn Sprick's Read Well, those we call little DI. And the only reason we call them that is they weren't the copyrighted, trademarked DI that are the original programs like Reading Mastery by Siegfried Engelmann. But there are other ways to assess than with a program's own placement. We can start with a good screener and then identify the kids who score different ways. And then we still do need to do something a little more detailed and diagnostic. For example, to find out kids who already are decoding CVC words and maybe digraphs and don't need to start there, but may need to start at long vowels or may need to start at multisyllabic words. So we need to dig deeper in order to create these groups and start them at the right point. Now, what is mastery instruction? Well, what we want to see is that students can get at least 70% correct on newly introduced skills the first time, and at least 90% on previously introduced skills. And if we're in a small group, we can immediately reteach. But if we still see students who are not getting that 70% on the newly introduced skills, or even the 90%, we may have grouped them inaccurately, or this is telling us that these are kids that may need a double dose in tier 2 or tier 3, for example. And when we do double dose with these students, we usually reduce the size of the group and intensify the instruction even more. We know that to achieve mastery, we need to have that high quality group-based initial instruction. And we have to give prompt, specific feedback that's targeted and makes the corrections right on the spot. We also need to monitor these kids regularly. And that's really important in a mastery setting, because one of the things we know is that there are kids who they may start lower, but they can accelerate fast. And then we're going to need to change their group. And we could do this every 2 weeks. And then there are those kids that we're noticing need to have that double dose. And so some of the programs that I've mentioned have built in mastery monitoring checks and assessments that will tell you immediately whether they're learning what they were taught. We want it to be corrective, intensified, and more supportive for those students who are struggling, and those are the kids that are going to likely need a tier 2 and a tier 3. And here, both in tier 1 small group and later in 2 and 3, we can target the amount, the pace, and the type of practice tuned to their performance on the spot. We want the materials to be completed with a high degree of success, so kids don't feel like failures right out of the starting block. And for those kids who have mastered the material easily and don't need a lot of corrective instruction, we can immediately target in their small groups enrichment or extension. So what is a roadblock? Well, management. I would say it's the largest roadblock. It's the question most folks raise. So to mitigate for this challenge of multiple small groups, a whole school approach is needed so that no one teacher has more than 2 groups. We know with appropriate assessments, if we're targeting these word recognition skills, that even in kindergarten and 1st grade, we could have as many as 4 different starting points for kids. And it's too many groups for any one teacher. So most of the curricula that were designed this way utilize a walk to reading regrouping model. And if any of you were familiar with reading mastery or success for all, or even SIPs, you know that walk to reading regrouping model. We also can train paraprofessionals, interventionists, and even parents to provide instruction to a small group. Now, Zig Engelman always said, if I have a school of 1,000, this is easy. I have so many classes, I can easily do across the school grouping. But if I have a tiny school, it's much more difficult. And we've worked with a Bureau of Indian Education reservation schools that may only have 5 teachers. So what have they done? They've enlisted parents. And the beauty of many of these curricula that start from a small group instructional approach is they're fairly scripted. They're all based on a structured literacy direct instruction model. And parents can be trained. And in fact, 2 of our Bureau of Indian Education schools that use reading mastery sent a group of parents to the National Institute for Direct Instruction, got them trained in reading mastery, and this benefited not only the students, but it benefited the parents and the school, because the turnover in our reservation schools is quite high. And being able to train the next generation of teachers by training these parents created a win-win for everyone, and also addressed economic needs that many of these parents and their families needed. And another point is that many schools have been doing guided reading groups, unfortunately. But if they can do guided reading groups, it shouldn't be difficult to do small group reading and word recognition instruction effectively. So I'm giving you an example now, and I believe this was one of the links that Donna sent from the Goyen Foundation. And this is a school in West Contra Costa Unified in Richmond, California. And I'm only showing you 1st and 2nd grade. This is a school that has a large population of multilingual and emergent bilingual students. So you're going to see teachers' names. Mr. Franco has two groups, a green group, and they're starting in this particular curriculum that they're using happens to be SIPS, which has 3 levels: beginning and extension and challenge. Challenge is mostly multisyllabic words. Beginning is mostly CVC and digraphs. And then extension gets into the long vowels and more complex variant vowel pattern words. So Mr. Franco has one group in extension starting at lesson 1 in first grade. That means they already mastered all of the beginning word recognition skills. Mr. Franco has a second group, and they're starting at extension 17. And I believe these are more complex patterns, still single syllable words. And then Miss Maza has a group that's starting in beginning at lesson 45, and another group who's really just starting out in beginning lesson 5. And then we come to Mr. Jang. Mr. Jang has a beginning group starting at lesson 11, but he has 3 groups, and he's able to handle 3 groups because 2 of them, silver and bronze, have already passed out of the entirety of SIPs, even through multisyllabic words. So they're able to work more independently, practicing skills they already know and going beyond. In Barba's second grade class, she still has students in beginning, starting with lesson 25, and she has another group starting with lesson 20 in extension, and she has a third group starting with lesson 31. And she chose to keep all of her students, but she has a paraprofessional and an interventionist who work with that beginning lesson 25 group. Then Ms. Etchie has 2 groups, and you could see the pattern here. And then we've got Schultz, who has 1 group working at extension level, a lesson 26. Now, what's interesting in this school is they do use the mastery measure tests that come with the program every 2 weeks, and they regroup pretty rapidly. These kids move a lot. No one gets stuck. So now, why small group instruction? And I want to summarize those points. First of all, it doesn't bore children who already started having mastered much of word recognition skills. And again, this is for word recognition that I'm speaking. It doesn't cause students who falter right at the start, or because of early screening we know are going to have challenges, to feel like failures and tune out. And it allows that close attention to what they're doing. And that includes what their mouths are doing, how they're articulating the sounds, and where they need reteaching immediately. So we can then give that corrective feedback at the exact point of need. And we can differentiate instruction to meet each student's need and respond much more effectively. So why are we only doing whole class instruction in word recognition in tier 1 and waiting until tier 2 or 3 to differentiate? Well, I think it's because Many of the curricula that are identified as strong and effective are designed with whole class instruction at the start. And then they tell you to differentiate for those students you're noticing are having difficulty. It appears to be a one size fits all. And this is exactly one of the issues that our multilingual and emergent bilingual colleagues are having with the way the science of reading has been interpreted. And differentiation may be too late. And unfortunately, even with the best curricula that start whole class, sometimes it's skipped. It just doesn't happen. And again, it's very difficult to attend to articulation and speech sounds, and then hearing and seeing those errors. And we can rarely give effective corrective feedback guidance. It's really hard to do that with the whole class. Now, am I saying that whole class word recognition instruction can't work? No, I'm not saying that. There are some very good curricula. I'll just name one that I'm very familiar with, and that's UFly Foundations, which is very good for kindergarten, first grade, even second. But if we can start in a small group, why wouldn't we? And think about it this way. Let's say my word recognition instruction in the whole class is approximately 30 minutes. And let's say instead I have two groups and I'm giving each of them about 15 or 20 minutes of targeted instruction during that time. And then I see those kids who are struggling and I'm giving them another 20 to 30 minutes in tier 2, or my interventionist, if I have one, is, or one of the other teachers if we're doing a walk to read, not just for tier 1, but for the other tiers. That means those children who are struggling can actually get about 40 to 45 minutes targeted right at their skill level of need. And if I wait and I'm just doing whole class and then differentiate in tier 2, they're only getting maybe 30 minutes targeted at their need. And again, I cannot do the kind of differentiation that needs to be targeted with enough frequency and of enough duration. I'm in too many schools where tier 2 is only 3 days a week, when many of these kids need that targeted instruction every day. And I'm going to take us now for a moment to Nancy Young's Ladder of Reading and Writing. And this is her newest version. And if you're not familiar with Nancy, Dr. Nancy Young is in Canada, and she's been working on this for a long time. And you could go to her website. The link is provided. And in the Ladder of Reading and Writing, you're going to notice there's that 5 to 10% of the students who learn to read, it seems effortless. Maybe they need instruction in spelling and writing, but in terms of learning to read, it comes very easily. And they would benefit from extended learning or acceleration. And that's going to be necessary. And then you have that group, about 35 to 40%, that it's relatively easy with broad instruction, but they still need some explicit instruction, particularly for spelling and writing. but they can move at a faster pace and even have increased implicit learning opportunities because they already will quickly master the explicit instruction. And then we've got that 40 to 45% who learn to read and spell, and for them, they need very, very clear and strong code-based instruction. And that applies to that smallest group or smaller group of 10 to 15% for whom it's really, really difficult. And these two groups need a very comprehensive, structured approach, and they need it right from the start. So this is the question that often comes up when I talk about small group instruction at the start. One common question is it equitable? Shouldn't they all be learning the grade level standards? Well, let's put it this way. If the grade level standards for first grade are to start with long vowels, but the kids didn't even learn CVC words yet, we can't leapfrog over that. Similarly, if second grade says multisyllabic words, but they can't decode single syllable words, again, we can't leapfrog over that. These are those constrained skills that must be mastered in, as IDA's infographic says, in a sequential and systematic way. And this is a quote from Stravula Valiendes, who did a very interesting study. And when you read my paper, my white paper, you'll see the full citation, so you'll be able to go get that study. And what she said was, within the context of differentiated instruction, equity is the opportunity that all groups of students have in a mixed ability classroom to fulfill the curriculum's goals to the maximum, according to their abilities and competencies, thus ensuring equal access to knowledge for all. It will maximize effectiveness and thereby allowing for the attainment of equity. I think that's a really important point that we need to understand, that these kids, if we do it right, if we start with targeted small group instruction, even in tier 1, we can accelerate those students who have the most difficulty. And this is one of Sharon Vaughn's concerns with whole class instruction for word recognition, that those kids who most need the best instruction are not going to be accelerated enough. And Valiendes went on to say that focused work at each student's skill need provided higher quality learning as measured by year-end growth than traditional whole class instruction. And then I want to add this statement. It's something that I've heard often, in particular from my friend Zaretta Hammond. Equity does not mean all children are treated equally with the same instruction, the same resources, and the same allocation of time, but rather that children get what they need when they need it to be successful. And I think about that wonderful graphic of the 3 children standing on boxes looking over a fence at a baseball game. But one child is shorter than the others. And if that child is on the same size boxes, he can't see over the fence. This child needs a taller box to reach the same outcome. And that's equity. So thanks to Dr. Stephanie Stoller, I want to answer questions that are always asked around this topic. A lot of people say, well, wasn't it tier 2 where we differentiate? Well, that's a misunderstanding of MTSS. We can do that starting in tier 1. In fact, if we want to maximize instruction, then we want small group instruction for tier 1 to happen right away, as well as for intervention. How do I determine the groups? Well, if you have a program that has a built-in placement, it's pretty easy. If you don't, we can start with looking at a screener, and then we can go deeper and start determining which word recognition skills the kids already know. And as I said before, we can group them. So we may have a group starting out, just mapping speech to print. And then we may have a group that can start with long vowels. And then another group that is starting with multisyllabic words, and even another group that's focusing on fluency. And then there's the big question. What do we do with the students that aren't working with me? Those other kids in the other group. And this applies in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. Well, this is where the walk to reading model is incredibly important, and bringing in all of the personnel resources available so that everybody is in a small group across the school. And this is where I bring my interventionists, my resource specialists. I can bring parents, paraprofessionals. We even have a school that has high school students doing it for their credit and working well-trained with a group of students, usually not the lowest group. If I'm not able to do that walk to reading and I don't have enough resources, then the independent work that the students I'm not with need to be work that they've already mastered. So they are only practicing what they already know, not working on new content. The beauty of some of the curricula I mentioned, reading mastery, SIPs, bookworms, Success for All, just to name a few, they already have designed in what to do with those groups that you're not working with. And then there's the question of what should my small group instruction look like? Well, it should look like structured literacy for the kids that really need that explicit instruction. And we pretty much know what the science of reading says we should be doing in those groups. And I'd like to share with you a video. It's only a trailer for the full documentary that I believe tells us why it is urgent we rethink how we're teaching all of these important skills to our students.
All across this country, kids are not being taught how to read the words.
This is a misunderstanding that has to be exposed, that the system works for most kids and it's those few that fail. And that's a lie.
Look it up, it's everywhere. You will see over 60% of children are not reading at grade level proficiency.
I was definitely hiding, keeping this secret to myself because I was embarrassed. More than anything, I felt like a fraud.
I remember I was always nervous to get called on. The teacher would realize who would read the best. They would eventually just continue calling on that person to read. I would always struggle.
17 years I taught public high school in California. I could not read, write, or spell.
got large challenges here in America. No greater challenge than to make sure that every child, not just a few children, every child receive a first-class education.
The No Child Left Behind law. No Child Left Behind had us focused on standardized tests, which start in 3rd grade. So everyone was laser focused on 3rd grade and beyond, and kind of what was happening K1, 2, they lost track of it.
There's a notion, a belief that kids start to read because they've matured to the point where they're ready to start reading. Not correct.
The reading wars, should we be teaching kids phonics or what was termed whole language? The theory was they just need to memorize a whole bunch of words and that's what good readers do.
They say, no, it's all about comprehension. But I say, well, if they can't read the words, how can they comprehend? It's almost like suggesting that a child who was listening to Mozart all their life, you put them in front of a piano and you say, now you play Mozart.
The research is unequivocally solid that phonemic awareness is absolutely critical to reach your highest potential reading and in spelling. It's something that we use all the time when we're reading and we don't even know it.
It's a lot more than phonics. It's the mechanics of how to read.
My daughter's kindergarten year, I was in the classroom. I saw their teaching instruction. She had directed them away from the words. Look at the picture. Do you think it's a bear or is it a fox? It stopped me in my tracks because it was everything that I had taught myself to do to look like a good reader.
And so you have to ask yourself, if we have this data, if we have this knowledge, why does there have to be a war? When we know that the outcome of us having that debate is literally the trajectory of someone's life.
If people only knew. It just totally tears you apart.
This entire issue requires a grassroots movement of parents and educators who are angry and who say enough is enough.
We're not dumb. We're not dumb. It's not too.
And I did want to say, I've been talking about word recognition. The language comprehension part of that reading rope, if you recall, I showed you the rope, we can do in the whole class instruction. Those are the unconstrained skills. And we should, because we want to build background knowledge. We want to build vocabulary and we need to build language, which is the basis for all of reading for everyone. It's those word recognition skills that we can take the time to really start with small groups from the beginning. So we don't have someone who taught for 17 years and couldn't read, write, or spell, and someone who hid because they were afraid to acknowledge that they couldn't read. It's too painful not to do this right. So I'm happy to take questions. And at this point, I'll open it up. And Donna, there may be some questions.
Anyone have any thoughts? Virginia.
You know, Donna, I always have to talk.
I know, I can always count on you.
I know. You know, that camera is going right on. So I have to say, before I ask my question, Donna and I have a relationship, and I texted her and I said, I'm a science of reading nerd, and I get very starstruck. And ironically, when science of reading first came into my universe, I jumped on the internet, and you were the very first person that Google directed me to. And I downloaded Reconciling the Science of Reading. And I have highlighted that and, referred back to it so often. So just thank you for what you've done for me and countless others. And it's just too important. And, the trailer sort of got me right here. So I just need a second. But so my question for you, with me in my classroom background, I teach first grade. And I am very much trying to do everything correctly. It's like very important to me that I get this right. So with me, with my small group, my first small groups are very much aligned with my screeners and my, the formals. But what I've been doing is just every day, and I'm a huge UFly gal. I just, I everything Holly Lane has done is just, right, what I have needed. But what I do pretty much every day as I'm doing the lessons and between the whiteboards and the, the phonemic awareness, I just do like a sweep and I just know who to grab. But after tonight, I'm wondering if I'm doing a disservice and it needs to be more formal than I'm actually doing.
Well, first, I would say you need to give yourself grace and not be so hard on yourself.
Thank you, Linda Diamond.
I think a lot of folks are just really trying to get it right, having not necessarily known what to do previously. So I think, your instincts are guiding you as to who to pull. It would be more effective if you had a good diagnostic that was specific and really told you, even if you don't have a curriculum that has its built-in placements, like Reading Mastery does, like SIPS does, for example, you can use, I think about a really good phonics diagnostic now that is called STAR phonics. Used to be called Key phonics, but it was acquired by Renaissance. And it's now called STAR phonics, developed by Dr. Michelle Haas. And that instrument, which is online, will tell you exactly which decoding skills and phonics skills kids know. And it's really very useful for targeting their instruction. But, I actually was one of Holly's advisors on UFly Foundation. So I think she did an awesome job. Holly also was an author of part of the Teaching Reading source book in the phonemic awareness section. So I too share your feelings about anything she does. I think as you're getting into this, you can see with a better approach with diagnostics, if you need to do something more. Right. But if you see that these kids are learning and they're learning quickly enough, that's part of the challenge. We want to accelerate those kids most at risk so they don't stay behind. This can't be like the old tracking. We have to really move them. Then if you see they're doing that, just keep doing what you're doing. That's my advice.
That's great advice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
I can share a little bit more. When I was teaching high school, this is back in 1972, I was Siegfried Engelmann's guinea pig for DISTAR in a high school setting. So I had about 20 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, all boys, and none of them qualified for special ed. But I would say about 8 of them were really, really low. They were reading around 3rd grade level. And then I had another group that was about 4th grade, maybe late 3rd, early 4th grade level. So I broke them into 2 groups. Now these were high school students. So I had a larger and a smaller group. I had a group of 8, those were my lowest. And I had a group of 12. Those were my 4th grade readers at and these were 10th, 11th, 12th graders. And that's when I learned that I could actually have them doing independent work as long as I found things to do that were practice of previously mastered skills. And also back in those days, we had something called high-low readers. Boy, am I dating myself. And
I was getting out of high school when I was in 72.
Okay. Oh yeah. So I really dated myself. So I also realized really quickly that if I was, I only had them for 42 minutes. And I realized that I needed more time with them because I needed to develop vocabulary and comprehension and language. So I asked the principal to give me them for another period. And I had never seen kids unscheduled so quickly because nobody wanted them. So I got them for a second period. And during that second period, I read aloud to them from all kinds of texts. My major was medieval English literature. So I was even reading Chaucer to them. And we were working on vocabulary during that time period. And about halfway through the year, the kids had developed enough of the decoding coupled with what I was doing with reading aloud and building background. And by then, Zig had created corrective comprehension. So I started using that as well. And by the end of the year, the kids were close to grade level.
Oh my gosh.
So this can happen if we target them and we really do it well.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, they were my guys, and I followed them throughout. One of these young men, I live in the Bay Area and San Francisco area, and at ACT Theater, they used to do student matinees. And they were doing a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, which we had read together in class, line by line. And two famous actors, Marsha Mason and Peter Donat. And during the play, one young man, Manuel Rubio, whom I'll never forget, was sitting next to me, and he was mouthing the lines ahead of Cyrano, which told me not only did he really read it, but he was a little over 300 pounds, and he related to Cyrano. And his family owned a Mexican restaurant in Albany, California. And I was invited in many times, La Profesora, who taught his their child to read. And these are the things that are so gratifying. And Virginia, this is what you're seeing as you're working with your kids. And all of you who are working with your students, it's that gratification of seeing that light bulb go off when they're reading.
Well, what's coming to my mind is keeping those kids in those leveled readers for so long that we've suppressed any knowledge gaining that they could possibly even do. And so hence, the movement about comprehension and bringing, just knowledge into their world, because we're all capable of learning that. It's just that combination of the upper and the lower strands of the rope put together. I just read an article about oral reading, the importance of it. In fact, there's a book coming out on it. We're going to be hosting that.
And you can, in a small group, you can hear them. That when they're doing their decodable text, for example, you can really hear them. You can really see them. And that's really difficult in a whole class setting. Now, I do see Stephanie says, ask to unmute. Let's see if I could do that.
You should be
No.
able to.
Stephanie, you can probably unmute yourself. There you go. Stephanie,
Yeah.
you can too. If you just toggle over
the red. Yep,
Sorry,
there
I
you go.
accidentally hit the button. I apologize.
Okay.
Oh, no problem.
All right, Linda, people wanted to know if the slides will be available.
Yes, I'll send them to you, Donna, and then you can post them. And did you get a chance to send out my white paper and those links?
You know, I thought I did, but somebody said they didn't, but I have it all in a folder somewhere and I'll find it and get it out to people. I typically like to wait afterwards to everyone who registered so they
Sure.
get the whole enchilada.
Yep. Well, good. I'll get you the recording, and I want to thank all of you for attending. And also, I do want to add again, give yourself grace. If you're starting out, don't beat yourselves up.
No, I think tonight was very insightful, and I think you planted some seeds, at least for me. It gave me some food for thought.
Right.
All right, wait, we have some messages coming in. Is that goodbye? Such an amazing presentation, and thank you. Yes, I completely agree.
Well, you're welcome.
And
Thank you.
don't be quitting anytime soon. You have too much knowledge.
Yeah, I can't do that. I can't quit.
I know it's hard to sit home, right?
Nope.
All
Very
right,
difficult.
thank you, my dear. Take
All
care.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Linda. It's one more check off my bucket list. One more person that I've met that has influenced me beyond what you'll ever know. Donna, you can
Thanks,
attest to
Virginia.
that. I'm the biggest SOR nerd there is.
Thank you.
But we love you.
Love you back.
Bye-bye.
All right, good night.